give a virtual applause to Mansi Gupta.
Thank you,
Hello.
Diane. Hello,
You're
how are
welcome.
you?
Good. Welcome to the stage. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Diane. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and it is such a privilege to be sharing my work and passion with you today, which all centers around design and women. Um, as Diane mentioned, I am based in Amsterdam, but I'm actually joining from India today. So if there is a little blip in my internet, it's because the electricity have gone off, but I will be back very quickly, just to give you a little note. All right. Um, I want to start off today with a story that helped me truly realize why we don't design for women. 2 years ago, I was working on a female financial inclusion project focused on women's savings in India. Um, we were at the user testing phase of the project, and I was sharing some of our prototypes with the client, an Indian bank. And as I brought out a simple paper envelope that women could collect small cash in, the client stopped me right there and said, they've already tried this and this does not work. And then he brought out a plastic wallet, kind of like a business card holder, and then proceeded to act out how it works. He fished out a 100 rupee note from his pocket, slipped it into the plastic wallet, and then slid the plastic wallet into his shirt breast pocket. And I'm just going to try to share my screen here. 1 second. All right. And so as he slipped it into his shirt breast pocket, I looked down at my own chest. I failed to find a breast pocket of my own. I thought of my grandmother in that moment, who would wear sari blouses and would sometimes collect small change in her bra. I thought about the women I would be user testing with later that day. In their kurtas, no shirt breast pocket there either. This story isn't really about my envelope or about the card wallet, plastic card wallet. It's about a man that was staffed on a women's focused project, and yet he so easily forgot about them. Before we go any deeper, I would love for us to explore a question together. So feel free to drop your answers into the chat. What happens when we don't design for women? And I will share a few examples with you as well as you think about that for a couple seconds. When we don't design for women, women experience harassment on professional platforms such as LinkedIn, with strangers reaching out to women wanting to connect because they are very beautiful. When we don't design for women, they're constantly undermined. This is the story of Dr. Louise Selby, who was locked out of female locker rooms in a large gym chain in the UK because if you were a doctor, you had to be a man. And so the female locker room thought she was a man. In certain parts of the world, women have to lean on male counterparts to access basic necessities. In this case, this woman is complaining that she still, in 2021, needs a male relative to testify for her so she can get out a car loan, in effect, limiting her mobility. Here's an example from India. India has actually been kind of forward in creating women-only compartments on their local trains and public transport. However, for the standing passengers, the handlebars are still installed at the male height, even though on average, Indian women are 14 centimeters shorter than men. And another funny tidbit is that coincidentally, when these trains stop at the stations, the women's compartment halts in front of the male restroom. And then finally, we have to talk about tech and how that constantly ignores women as well. There have not only been stories about voice recognition software engineers saying that they wished women would train their voices to sound more like men. Today's voice assistants have failed sometimes to understand words that apply to women more, such as rape and being hit, and have, in some cases, responded mockingly to these inquiries. I'm especially excited to be sharing this work with you today because I know that many of us in this virtual room have experienced this firsthand or are working on inclusive design. And one of the ways that we're working on inclusive design to shift these dynamics is through internal diversity and inclusion teams, and specifically around women and design. We are approaching this through women in movements, such as let's bring more women into design, let's bring more women into tech, let's bring more women into X, whichever industry women are underrepresented in. And while this is a key piece of the puzzle, because how could we design a world for women if women don't have a voice at the decision-making table, it is also a lot of pressure to put on one approach, on our teams, in our organizations, to lean on just one approach. And partially that's because women on these teams are experiencing both isolation and the onus of leading change in spaces that aren't designed for them. And so, where do we go from here? And kind of similar to Betsy, I started to question our design processes. And I started to flip the script and think about how can we support women in design by thinking about what design for women looks like. And so the question I want to pose today is, have we evaluated or critiqued today's design methodologies in how they cater to women? Do they support women in the change that they want to lead? Do they give the tools to others in order to share that onus of leading change? And what I found is that under the guise of being gender neutral, often our design methodologies create one size fits men outcomes under the guise of being one size fits all. This not only upholds the status quo, it also sometimes exacerbates the gaps. Let me share an example of how it does that. So there was a study conducted on over 2,000 startups who went through what are so-called gender neutral accelerators. And what they found was that the men joined the accelerators with a 1.8x funding lead, but they exit the accelerators with a 2.6x funding lead vis-a-vis women. This means that the gender neutral approach to acceleration, the gender neutral design of accelerators fails to acknowledge women's needs, and it fails to acknowledge really changing the gender gap in the fundraising and in the gender financing gap. And so I began to ask myself, what does it mean to actively and intentionally design for women? And I'm hardly the first one to ask this question. There have been practitioners in the world working with women for years, learning about women and working together with them to create a world that designs for them. And so I went to exactly these practitioners. And I spoke to practitioners that are creating women-centric communities and building financial products with a female-centric lens, creating media and education programs for women across India, Uganda, the Latin American region, the US and the UK. And at the center of all these conversations was one question, which is, what have you learned about women and girls in all your time of serving this community? And as I reached a higher and higher number of these practitioner conversations, I began to see an overlap in a lot of what many of these practitioners were saying. And I began to see re-emerging themes and re-emerging key needs for women and girls that are constantly underserved. And so to share this with the world, what I'm currently building is called Design for Women. It is a tool and framework to ensure a women-centric design lens among designers and project teams from the get-go, so that when you go into your research and when you go into the questions that you want to ask the community, you are a little bit more aware of which key needs have continued to emerge and stay stagnant for years among the women community. And so today I'm really excited to share, I'll be sharing 3 key themes that have emerged in my work over the last few months. The first one is called Holistic Design for Women. And to explore and share this theme with you a little bit, what I'll first do is share some examples of what holistic design is not. So the cool thing is that, there is an emergence in female-centric design. We're starting to see more and more products and services that are designed for women. But unfortunately, what we're also seeing is that these products and services, many of these products and services, reduce women to their reproductive system. When I share this work with folks, I always ask the question, take a moment to think about which products and services you think truly design and serve women. And often, most of the answers are crowded around menstruation, maternity, breast pumps. And while that's a really key part of designing for women, we also need to think about the subset of women that is truly serving. For example, the period tracker Glow for a long time was designing around the chance of pregnancy. And it's important for us to remember that designing around pregnancy isn't the same as designing for women. Another example of how we're failing holistic design is that even in 2021, we're seeing ample examples of pinkwashing. Take a product and service, turn it pink, and that is how it serves women. And finally, another way that holistic design is being averted is when there are solutions created for things where there wasn't even a problem to begin with, just in order to sell to women. So in case you missed this story, earlier this year, there were 3 German male founders who co-founded a product called Pinky. And yes, it is pink. And it is a plastic glove that women can use to dispose of their tampons. I'm not sure if they spoke to any women to understand that what they truly need was access to safe bathrooms and not another piece of plastic. But even if they'd gotten all of that right, the funny thing was that the gloves they designed were too big for women's hands. And so the question I ask you today is, how might we truly and holistically design for women? And I acknowledge this is a really big question. But I think that in all the things that we're doing in order to design for women today, we're just scratching the surface. In healthcare, we're focusing on period trackers. In finance, many countries are focusing just on women's savings programs. And yes, we have to start somewhere. But there is all of this other everyday products and services that women use that continue to exclude them. So what are the opportunities that lie there in order for us to make everyday products and services truly meet women's needs? And another perspective that I want to share here is an organizational one. How might organizations start thinking about the women that they touch in their whole system? So starting with their staff and the products and outputs that they produce and the supply chain that they engage. So for example, there's FMCG companies today that have jumped on the DEI train and are trying to diversify their workforce. However, at the same time, they're still selling skin whitening creams across the world and are not trying to intervene in the narrative around skin color. So I encourage organizations to think about what gender design truly means to them. So that's the first principle that truly continues to surface in my conversations with the gender practitioners. The second one is around safety and safe spaces. So Uber has an SOS page that talks about its safety toolkit. And it says that having an SOS functionality can save up to 10,000 lives. However, Uber didn't roll out the SOS functionality until there were a few cases of sexual harassment through their product and service. And I have a hunch that that's because safety matters more to women than it does to men. And it was men building the product. I'm sure it's not a surprise to anyone in this room that women have navigated much of their life in fear. A reported 67% of women are afraid to walk in multi-story car parks, for example. And a reported 81% of women have experienced some form of sexual harassment globally. So what I started to learn from our women-centric community builders is that simply being in a women's only environment actually creates a safe space for women. And not only does it do that, it creates this give and take relationship with other benefits, such as generosity and reciprocity, and an emergence of a support system. For example, Maria Potorocin, the co-founder of WIN, says that one of her biggest lessons from building WIN has been that if you want to create a generosity-driven community, make it a women-centric one. But what's interesting is that the gender practitioners, even the ones that are operating in women-only spaces, don't lean on that to create a safe space. Instead, they do it actively. They design a safe space actively. And even beyond the women-centric community builders, safety and safe spaces is the number one topic that continues to emerge in my research with the gender practitioners. So I'd love to share a few ways that some of the women-centric community spaces are actively creating a safe space. A very common one is having and enforcing a code of conduct. We too at Unconform run a monthly event series, and our code of conduct is included in every single RSVP form and acknowledged at the start of every event. Another women-centric community builder speaks about how an increase in comparison culture makes an environment unsafe. And so she has consciously stayed away from pre-existing social media platforms that encourage comparison and built her own to reduce comparison culture. Yet another community practices radical anonymity because it addresses certain issues that women face that are more likely to be taboo or induce judgment. And practicing radical anonymity allows for the community to feel safe in voicing both their questions and the advice. And so I want to leave you with, safety matters beyond the physical. It is very clear. It matters a lot in public transport, but it matters beyond the physical. And so I want to urge you to think about the question, what does safety look like and mean in your product or service? How might you co-define safety with the communities that you want to design with? And the third theme is around credibility. And I almost named this one confidence, and you'll see why in a second. So a reoccurring theme and observation that comes up with our gender practitioners is that women are more likely to be blamed and shamed for mishappenings or mistakes. And they're also more likely to blame themselves for mistakes that happen or mishappenings that happen. And as a result, women are perceived to be inherently risk averse by many. But in reality, really, that isn't the case. It's just that they experience much higher costs of failure. There's a flip side to this. Our research shows that, for example, men are more likely to attribute their success to their own skill, but women, when successful, attribute it to luck. And a lot of people see the insight here as women experiencing imposter syndrome. And as a result, many solutions emerge as direct confidence building trainings or leadership development trainings for women. But what I see here is a little bit different. What I've learned from our gender practitioners is that it isn't that we need to increase women's confidence. It is that in certain conventionally categorized male territory things like money, for example, women might need more information, more time, more social proof, more transparency to make decisions. How do we address this? So one of our gender practitioners, Chaitra Chidanand, who is building a financial product focused on women in India, says that she has started to think about her product journey as a place where she can identify moments to address the shame and anxiety that women feel around money and make it an opportunity to instill pride. And a few other ways that gender practitioners are building credibility is by acknowledging, for example, the importance of social proof and bringing that into their user journey. Or really truly understand that something like finance might feel intimidating jargon wise to women, and they work actively to demystify the jargon and truly design the delivery of information. Yet another platform that is also a financial platform for women has actively become not a faceless platform. So women are not talking to, they're talking with a relationship, someone they have built a relationship with, because loans and credit is involved. And so the theme here is what it really showed me is that it's not about increasing a woman's confidence or decreasing her shame. Because I think also in this, looking at it from this perspective, is also putting the onus of change on the woman and subtly telling her that there's something wrong with her that she needs to change. So instead, we should ask, how might your product or service win over the trust of a woman? As I've been building Design for Women, I've had many moments of pause where I've thought, these themes and needs, they feel so obvious. Of course, women need to feel safe. Of course, we should feel like we can trust the products and services that we need. So, am I doing something wrong here? What's going on? And to answer that question, I always come back to that man that was staffed on that women's focus project with the plastic card wallet. And I remember that he didn't deliberately set out to exclude the women. He just didn't think about them. And that's what happens to women in the design process a lot. We're either not thought of, or we're diminished to being a type of man, or a small man, or an extreme case, or a niche. And so I urge you all today to think about holistic design, safety, and credibility, and some of the other themes that will slowly begin to emerge that are truly important for women, and where we've forgotten to make connections with everyday products and services, and are really missing a link to serve and cater women. Because it's only when we start to make the connections of the very obvious and of the very basic, because truly women are not asking for more than that, that's when we can start to shift the dynamic and design for our women. Thank you so much.